Good evening or afternoon or morning, really, depending on where you are tuning in from, everyone. My name is Sydney Yeager, and I'm the Senior Public Programs Producer at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm really pleased to welcome you to today's Story Survive program about the book Schindler's Listed. Here at the museum, we are dedicated to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. Thank you so much for joining us today virtually. We hope that if you are able to, that you will visit the museum in person to see our current exhibitions, including Courage to Act, Rescue in Denmark, which is the museum's first exhibition for visitors ages 9 and up, and also the museum's newest exhibition, Speaking Up, Confronting Hate Speech. And you can learn more about both those exhibitions on our website. Closed captions are available on today's program, and instructions on how to turn captions on or off are posted in the chat. If you have questions for our speaker during the program, please put them in the Zoom Q&A box. So not the chat, the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. Today, we are so honored to be joined by Randi Biederman. Randi is co-author of Schindler's Listed, The Search for My Father's Lost Gold. She is a former high school science teacher and spent her 30-year career in Windsor, Ontario. She is a widow, mother, horticulturist, writer, and speaker. Randi is a native of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So we are very pleased to have her with us. You can purchase Schindler's Listed at the link in the chat, and I'll put that in again. And so thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. And now I'm going to hand things over to Randi.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sydney. I appreciate the kind introduction. I'm going to also do a share. I'll be doing a screen share through the entire talk because the pictures kind of lead me through the story. Anyway, there's the picture of the book. This is what got me invited. This has become my avocation to talk, to educate about the Holocaust, and particularly about my family members who survived it and many who did not. Anyway, this book primarily focuses on the story of my late father-in-law, Hersch Biederman, who was a Holocaust survivor, and also his wife, my late mother-in-law of blessed memory, Salamea. Now, this is back in Europe. Both of these folks were my in-laws. Back in Europe, they were known as Hersch and Salamea. They came to the United States to launch their new life after surviving the Holocaust and enduring displaced persons camps, and they became Harry and Sally. So they are my personal Harry and Sally. And they were a love match, which was actually pretty rare of Holocaust survivors. They usually didn't end up with loving marriages, but mercifully, fortunately, they did. So anyway, they moved to the Detroit area where they restarted their lives and had their two sons, one of whom was my late husband, Mark. And Mark was a very precocious young kid, and he knew right away that there was something different about his parents. First off, they had accents, which was pretty unusual in suburban Detroit in the 1960s. And second off, one of the things he became aware of very young was that his parents did not seem to have any other relatives. He'd go to kids' birthday parties in the neighborhood, and there'd be grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins, and he had none of that. And he'd say to his parents, "Why don't I have any of these family members everybody else seems to have?" And they were like, "They were all killed." And he'd say, "Killed? Like, what? Tell me more." And they were like, "We'll talk to you about it when you're older." And unfortunately, that whole thing about when you're older never happened for Mark because this picture was taken at Mark's bar mitzvah. 13-year-old Mark, proud bar mitzvah boy's parents, and less than 6 years later, Hersch contracted pancreatic cancer, got very sick very quickly, and died without sharing virtually any of his Holocaust stories. All of his history, how he lived, what his life was like during the Holocaust, all of it was lost because he died so suddenly and so tragically. But one of the few stories that he did share with his son was something tied to this coin. And let me get to the right spot. So anyway, the one story that he got from his dad was tied to this coin, the Mercury head dime, which went out of circulation in the United States in 1945. And how this story kind of evolved is back when Mark was about 9, he went grocery shopping with his mother. And that was back in the old days when you had to pay with cash. So they go through the grocery store, goes through the checkout line, everything's checked out. She hands in some bills, she gets some coins back. Mark was a good boy in the grocery store, so he got some coins. One of them was this Mercury head dime, and he was so excited. And he's like, Mom, look, I got a Mercury head dime. I'm going to start a coin collection. And she was like, oh, coin collection. Go talk to your dad about that. So Mark could hardly wait to get home to tell his dad about this coin collection that he was going to start. So he runs in the door, he's all excited, and he's like, Dad, look at this coin. I'm going to start a collection. And just something about the exuberance of his little 9-year-old and seeing this excitement, and it triggered something in Hersh. And he said, my family had a coin collection back in Poland. Back in the day, my family had this, and we got it all together and we buried it in the yard in Poland just before we were deported by the Nazis. And it was like, wow, here's this amazing story. And that was it. That was all he told Mark, was that there were coins and they were buried before they were deported. So Mark said to himself, wow, that's a fascinating story. But he knew better. As the son of Holocaust survivors, he knew better than to ask his parents too many questions. So he just kind of held that thought in the recesses of his mind and just said to himself, okay, I'll hold this and I won't ask anymore. And he never asked anything again. And like I said, Hersh died young. Life went on. Mark went off to Michigan State initially to study animal science, and then he stayed on at Michigan State to do a degree in veterinary medicine. And in his second year of veterinary school, his mother called him up and said, look, it's time for me to move. I don't want to stay in the family home anymore. It's too big. There's too many memories. It's time for me to move on. So what happened is Mark said, I will show up on the weekend and let's talk about packing up the house. So one of the things he did was bring some boxes. But okay, so Mark shows up at the house and he decides to start cleaning out his dad's nightstand. And what does he find? These pictures. And he says, Mom, what are these pictures that Dad has in his nightstand? And she said, oh, that was your dad's mom and 2 of his sisters. And Mark was like, really? Dad had sisters? I mean, that was the level of secrecy in this family that Mark wasn't even aware that there were sisters. And then there were more pictures. Here's a picture of Mark's
Oh, I'm
Mark's
sorry,
dad and his.
Randy, you're not sharing your screen. I'm so sorry. I
Okay. All right, let me get this. So here are the pictures of the 3 Biederman sisters, of which Mark had no knowledge. He had no idea that these 3 sisters existed. And I mean, It's stunning that anyone could have that level of secrecy in their family, that they didn't realize that their dad had 3 sisters. So, anyway, as he's sitting there looking at these pictures, aghast that he never knew that there were, other family members. I guess it never occurred to him to ask, and his parents would just never say. So, what ends up happening is he sits his mother down. He said, "Okay, the time for secrecy is over. I need to know. Tell me your story." So she shared her story, and um, so he got as much as he could out of her. And then he said, "Okay, let's go to dad's story. What do you know about dad?" She said, "Well, not much." And he said, "Well, what do you know about the girls?" "Well, nothing." "Do you know their names even?" "No." Names, birthdays. All she knew about the girls was that they were killed during the war. That's it. No names, no birth dates, no date of death for year site, nothing. So it was actually something that haunted Mark, because he's like, geez, there's this whole family that I had that I know nothing about. And so he made a promise to himself, to his mother, that he was going to find out the story of the girls, story of the rest of the family, and also he wanted to find out about these coins. So he starts a letter writing campaign. The one thing his mother did know about the dad was that he was from Krosno, Poland. And so Mark pressed her into service and said, "Okay, we are going to do a letter writing campaign, and you and me, we're going to find out what happened to the family and where they lived and where these coins are buried." So um, he starts getting her to write these letters. And they're going to Krosno, Poland, to the city hall, the vital records office, anywhere where he thinks he can get some information. And unfortunately, he never got any responses, which, if you look at the time frame, wasn't horribly unusual, because the fact that um, this was during the time when Poland was part of the greater Soviet empire. They were firmly behind the Iron Curtain, and if the letters even made it there, there's a very good chance that the staff would probably look at them and say, "We don't have to answer anybody in the States." And they didn't. So time went on, and then finally I meet Mark, and I'm like, "Okay, tell me about this story." I mean, he's telling me this story, this amazing, his parents and his dad, and they survived. And then there's these coins. And I'm like, "Wow, so what have you done so far to track this down?" And he said, "I've written a lot of letters." And he said, "Well, that's about it." I said, "Well, have you been to Poland?" And he said, "Well, no, but as a child of Holocaust survivors, I kind of have some trepidation about going to Poland." And by the time I met Mark, the Iron Curtain had fallen. 1991, the Iron Curtain had fallen, and the travel to Poland was possible. Wasn't easy. The infrastructure wasn't great. The roads were terrible. However, it was possible to travel. So we booked a trip and off we went. And in my naivety, I thought we could actually find out information. So we booked a trip. We flew from Detroit to Frankfurt, which was the easiest way to get to Poland then. And then we rented a car and drove across Germany and into Austria. And I'm going to try and share another picture. Um, see if we can get this up. So anyway, this picture I wanted to share because here we are in Austria, and this is in Salzburg, and this was pretty early in the trip. This was like day 2, and we're in Austria, and we're in Salzburg having a wonderful time and thinking, wow, isn't this the greatest? And we're going to go to Poland, we're going to get all our information, and everything's going to be great. The next day we pulled into Poland, and I want to show this picture because it was pretty much the last time we smiled on this trip, because the next day We crossed into Poland, and allow me to show you the picture. The first place we stopped in Poland is, I don't know why this isn't working. I don't know why it isn't working either. I'm devastated. Here we go. Okay,
We can see that.
wonderful. Okay, this was our first place we stopped in Poland. Here we are in Auschwitz II, also known as Birkenau. An infamous, devastating, horrible place, tragic, and we both cried. And like I said, we didn't smile again after this trip because this was devastating. And this had personal impact on Mark because we did know that his mother had spent time. She had been on this railway siding going into Auschwitz. Incredibly, mercifully, she did find her way out of Auschwitz, ended up going to Bergen-Belsen, and then finally on to Theresienstadt, where she was liberated. So that was pretty much our introduction to Poland. After we visited with Auschwitz, we went on to Krakow, which was not very far away, second largest city in Poland, where Mark's mom was from. We went around Krakow and saw some sites there and stayed in a hotel, and then realized if we were going to go on to Krosno, which was a tiny little outpost in southeastern Poland, we knew that we were going to have challenges with the roads, with the directions. So we decided to hire a guide. And we hired somebody named Mishkel. And he came and picked us up at the hotel, and he was quite fluent in English and obviously fluent in Polish. So we figured he was going to be a lot of help. So on the hour and a half drive on our way to Krosno, we told him the story of Mark's family, and he's, nodding and okay. Like, do you have any ideas? You're going to be helpful? Take us to where we need to go to get information. And he said, oh, well, I'll take you to City Hall first. So we go into the City Hall, and Mishkel stays with the car and doesn't come with us, which I thought was kind of interesting, but I thought maybe he was trying to give us privacy. I don't know. But anyway, we go and in Mark's halting Polish, he's trying to explain to this person that he wants information about the Biederman family of Krosno. And the woman's just sullen and shaking her head like, no information, not having it. And then finally she got frustrated and she just pulled down the kiosk closed door, and that was it. I thought, wow. It was quite a revelation that, I think that you think you go to a governmental agency, you're going to get the information you want or need, and that just didn't happen. So we went to a few other places in Krosno and were met with pretty much the same thing. We then thought, well, let's do something else. And I did ask Mishkel, I said, you know what? We've been to 3 different places, and you take us here and then you sit in the car. I said, do you want to come in with us and translate? And, maybe you'd be helpful. And he said, you know what? He said, I kind of don't even want to get into this because you realize that we don't get a lot of people from North America here. And pretty much the only people we get are Jews, and we're worried that they are coming to look and try to find family homes, family businesses, and reclaim them. So he said, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of information here. I'm like, oh, great. That was, it was a revelation. So I thought, wow, okay. We've tried City Hall, Vital Records Office, Postal Archives, everything, and to no avail. And I said, okay, where do we go now? And he says, let's go to the cemetery. And so we thought, let's go. And We went to the cemetery and thought we will get some ideas. If there's any Biedermans buried there, at least maybe we'd have some idea that there were Biedermans that lived there at some point. I mean, we didn't even know that at this point. So off we went to the cemetery, and hopefully I will be able to find a picture of the cemetery that I do have here. um, okay. Oh, goodness. Sydney,
Yes,
okay, you're still with me here.
I'm still
There's
here.
okay. I'm um I'm really I'm really kind of
I think if you're not able to pull up the images, if you want to just keep going with your story and we can
yeah,
just
I
listen.
think I will. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me tell you about the cemetery. Can you see me now or anything?
Yes, we can still see you. You're all good.
Okay, that's good. All righty. The reality is the cemetery was just a disaster. Um, the um, the cemetery was broken down. The headstones were toppled. The weeds were 3 feet high, and there was no ability for us to figure out anything from that. So I'm like, geez, this is a disaster. I understand that there've been a lot of both American and Israeli initiatives to clean up the cemeteries in Poland, but at that time they were just awful, and it was completely heartbreaking that we were looking at this. And so, no, could we find any family members? Absolutely not. So anyway, off we go back to Krakow in the car with Mishkel, and we were both pretty sullen with the idea that here we'd come all this way with all these plans and hopes and dreams, and it just didn't pan out at all. And I think that it was a lesson for us in a way that we were able to see that it wasn't going to be as easy as we thought it might be. So off we went, got back in the car after a visit to Krakow, headed north in Poland, crossed back into Germany, went to Berlin, went to the Wannsee House, and we were able to. The Wannsee House, if you aren't aware, is the house where the Nazi leaders got together to determine how to enact the final solution. This horrible place has now been turned into a wonderful place. It's beautiful. It's around a lake, gorgeous surroundings, and it now houses archives and vital records of all the Holocaust survivors. And we were able to find a tremendous amount of information about Mark's mother's family, but absolutely nothing about his dad's family, which was our main reason for being there. So we went back, drove back to Frankfurt, got into the plane and went back home. And then we were sort of sitting there thinking, well, what do we do with this? The letter writing was a disaster. The trip to Poland was pretty much a disaster. Where do we go from here? And it was like, Mark was launching his veterinary career. I was launching my teaching career. Who needed this? Maybe we'll just let it be. And then two things kind of happened in tandem that changed everything for us. Number one, um, the internet. You know, people that grow up now that were not aware of pre-internet days, you have no idea how difficult it was to research. Nowadays with the internet, oh, it changed everything. Here we were, 1995 a month, unlimited AOL access and one email address that Mark and I shared for years. And we were on dial-up, putting the phone into the cradle. And it was the infancy of the internet, but it was still a boon to us because suddenly there were all these Jewish genealogy sites and you could go on and research and look things up and learn. So it was huge for us. The second thing that happened that was absolutely massive for us was one of Mark's horse clients. Mark went into equine surgery. One of his horse clients, who was also a World War II history buff, had been watching a TV show on the making of Schindler's List, the movie. And the documentary talked about, citing, trying to hire staff and getting actors to portray the roles and having them be believable, and the sites that they used in Europe, etc. And they panned across the list. And he saw the name Biederman. So he picked up the phone and he called Mark and he said, "Was your dad on Schindler's List? I was just watching this TV show and it looked like Biederman was right at the top of the list there." And Mark said, "Well, gosh, I don't really know because my dad um, never told me, but my dad never said anything about anything." So he had this new information. The dad's name was on Schindler's List. We had the internet. So what did Mark do? He went online and I don't know if you can see. Here is the first page of Schindler's List, and highlighted is Mark's dad's name. Hersch Biederman, birth date 7th, 9th of 25. Mark's dad's birth date. So it's like, God, my dad was on Schindler's List. I mean, first off, it's huge. His dad was a part of history. Second off, I mean, this was in the mid 1990s, 1,200 people on this list. Some of them were probably still alive and would know his dad. He could get information from people. So off he went to the internet and found some Schindler's List chat sites for survivors. And he started writing, "Does anybody know Hersch Biederman from Krosno, who was on Schindler's List?" And within days, he got a response, and he heard from a gentleman named Alex White. And I don't know, let me see if we can. There's Alex White. Alex White was number 269 on Schindler's List. So he was kind of buried deep in those 14 pages of Schindler's List. And he got in touch with Mark through email and said, "I was the bunkmate of Hersch Biederman. However," he said, "the Hersch Biederman whom I was bunkmates with was not from Krosno. He was from Lodge." And Mark's like, "Well, maybe it's not the same person then." Because, my dad, the one thing that my mom absolutely knew about with my dad was that he was from Krosno. So he's like, "No, the guy I was with, same birth date, same name, Lodge." And Mark's like, "Wow, you know what? Let me send you a picture." So he pulls out a picture of his dad from the early days and sent it to Alex, who was living at that time in Phoenix, and said, "Okay, this is the oldest picture I have of my dad." And Alex looked at it and said, "Sure enough, this is who I knew on Schindler's List. Your dad's from Lodge." And Mark was like, "Wow, that changes everything." For a number of reasons. Number one, Lodz was such a big city. I mean, Lodz is the second largest city in Poland. So there were probably many, many more survivors from Lodz that would have known him. And just, the fact that the possibilities were greater that we would find somebody that knew his dad. In fact, there were so many survivors in the United States from Lodz that they actually put out a quarterly newsletter called The Ledger. How great is that? So Mark goes to his mom and says, "Mom, Dad was not from Krosno, he was from Lodz." And she said, "No, he wasn't." She was adamant and determined he was from Krosno. And Mark said, "You know what? Humor me on this. You're connected in the survivor community. Ask around, see if anybody knew Dad." And so she did, grudgingly. She asked a few people here and there, and nobody knew him. And people around Detroit said, "What are you asking about lunch?" He was from Krosno. It was just among the community, it was just common knowledge that he was from Krosno. So she kind of said, "Oh, forget it. It's not going to happen." And then in March of 2001, she went to Florida for the month of March. It's one of those I got to get out of Detroit things. And off she went, and she was staying a few days here, a few days there with all of her friends around Miami, Boca Raton, etc. And one afternoon, she's in Boca Raton, and she says, I'm going to go get some lunch at a deli. So she goes into a deli, puts her order in, gets her tray. She's got her pastrami, her black cherry cola, and she turns around with her tray to find herself a seat. And there's a man sitting there reading a ledger. So she sees him, and Sally was, naturally very friendly and gregarious. So she went over and she says, "Oh, you're from Poland. Let me sit with you. We'll eat. We'll talk." And she says, "Sorry, you got a lodger, They're from Lodge and they're talking away. And she says, my son's got this idea that his dad is from Lodge, but I don't really think so. Any chance you knew Herr Biederman?" And he looked up from his lodger and he says, "Yeah, I knew him." Hey, he was from Lodge. So his name was Izzy Olivex. So Izzy wrote down his phone number and his name and said, "When you get back to Detroit, give this to your son and have him call me." I mean, what a serendipitous event that was. So here he was. He's got a contact. It's amazing. I mean, all the pieces are starting to fall in place. So he gets back and Mark makes the phone call and says, "Izzy, I talked to my mom. She says you knew my dad in Poland." And Izzy says, "Yeah, I know." And he was not exactly a talkative or extroverted or friendly kind of guy. Mark felt like he was just trying to pull information out of him. And finally, just out of frustration, he said, "Well, you wouldn't happen to have an address, would you?" And he said, "Yeah, he lived at Zaglarska 7." And Mark was like, "How would you have remembered um, that? Somebody you haven't seen in decades, and you remember his address." He says, "Yeah, my family lived next door at 9." I mean, isn't that amazing? This was the next door neighbor, and he survived, and he was in Florida. He should have, could have been a wealth of information, but he wasn't real um, open with discussion. So I come home from work that night, and Mark says, "We're going back to Poland." And I wasn't real excited about it. The first trip hadn't been that much fun. And I just didn't know how I felt about that. But Mark's like, "Look it, we got to do this. We're still in the infancy of the internet. We did not have Google Earth. We couldn't tell the street if it still existed, the house." He said, "I've got to go. I've got to see where my dad grew up." So off we were. Did the same thing, flew Detroit to Frankfurt, got a rental car, except this time we went to Lodge. And we pulled into Lodge, and Lodge famously had anti-Jewish graffiti all over the walls. I mean, everywhere. We're driving in, and I'm like, "Oh, this is not looking good. This is not a friendly place." And I was so kind of overwhelmed that I didn't want to leave the hotel once we finally got there. But I got talked into it, and off we went. And we're heading north out of the city. And what do we find? There's the Glarska Street. There's 7. There's 9. The houses were still in existence. So we thought, wow, this is where Mark's family came from. And then what about this yard? Can we dig up the yard and look for the coins? But the greeting of all this anti-Semitic graffiti led us to think maybe it would be best if we didn't. So what ended up happening, we went back home. Mark's trying to figure out, okay, the house is there, the yard's intact, everything looks like it should be good. How do we do this? And he's thinking, well, if the coins are still there, they are at least deeply buried that we will not find them with a standard coin, the metal detector that finds coins and jewelry at the beach. So one evening, he's watching a documentary, and there's a man named Yaron Sfore, an Israeli, who made his name locating plundered treasures that the Nazis had gotten away with. And he was using a ground penetrating radar. And Mark's like, that's it. That's what we need. We need a ground penetrating radar because it goes down 3 feet and they can apparently find a fork buried 3 feet deep. So he's like, this is what we need. So, I mean, this is, 2001, 2002. You couldn't exactly find a ground penetrating radar on eBay. So he said, I need your own Sfore. So somehow or other, Mark gets a hold of your own Sfore, tells him the story. Your own's interested. And he says, meet me in New York. I'm going to be in New York in August. And I'm going to be talking to a man named Pierre Kafka, who was at that time the head of Fox News. We'll pitch it to him, and maybe Fox News will get involved, and we can, get them to front the trip. So we thought, great. So off we are to New York, and we meet with Yaron. We meet with Pierre. Pierre's completely disinterested. He says, it's all Baba Masa. He said, you realize that every Holocaust survivor kid thinks that there's treasure buried in a backyard. So another disappointment. So we leave, and then Yaron's following us down the street in New York saying, don't worry, I got other ideas. We're gonna, we'll come up with something and something better. So he came up with some crazy ideas about buying the property, this and that, digging it up, but nothing came to fruition. And then on August 21st, 2004, Mark gets a phone call from Yaron saying, hi, Mark, Pierre and I are here with the Fox News crew. We're in Lodge, and we've just dug up your family's coins. So the guy that wasn't interested somehow got interested. But unfortunately, they failed to tell Mark they were going to do this, which was kind of a huge disappointment, but it's the way it happened. And I try to take it in stride that, well, at least the coins were found. However, I didn't think it went about it nicely. And I've got my spreadsheet here. I don't know how well you can see this, but you probably can't. I will send the pictures to Sydney and hopefully she can get them on later. But there was a huge newspaper article about these coins being found. So Yaron's there, hands the phone to a woman who's a journalist for the Lodge Gazette. And she says, hi, Mark, I'm covering this story here. It's amazing. It's fascinating. Are you coming to Lodge? And Mark's like, I guess. So Mark was on the next flight. He flew this time Detroit to Warsaw, got a train from Warsaw to Lodge. Joanna and her film crew picked him up at the train station and took him around Lodge, showed him both the house and the series of holes they dug. They found the coins on the fifth hole they dug, and took him to the Museum of Archaeology and Ethnography where the coins were being held, and said, here you go. You've got a lot of the story now answered. The Polish government did hang on to the coins. They determined that they were theirs. And Joanna felt really bad about it. She'd spent about 3 days with Mark, taking him around and seeing the sights and everything. When she took him back to the train station, one of the things she said to him was, look, I feel really bad about the way in which this turned out. And she said, is there anything I can do? And he said, yeah, I still have a lot of loose ends. I don't know what happened to the girls. I don't even know their names. Can you see if you can use your journalistic skills and find some documentation on my family. And 6 weeks later, in the mail, we get this. Ah, I wish that it would come up better, but well, okay, let me tell you what it is. It is the marriage certificate for Mark's paternal grandparents and birth certificates for the 3 girls. So he had come full circle. The coins are found. He now has the girls' birth certificate. He's got their names, he's got their birth dates. And that launched us, having these names launched us on a whole other trajectory to find out more information about the family and to be able to answer the questions. And we now have the dates for lighting yurtsite candles for the family. And it led to us being able to put the information together to put a full book out. So that I would really encourage you to read the book because this is just such a brief overview. And it's an amazing, interesting, and incredible journey of so many years. I mean, the absolute tenacity that we had to have to stick through it. I mean, we were so fortunate to have a number of serendipitous events happen to lead us to the answers, but it kind of renewed my faith that somehow, if you work at it, it will be given to you. And it's something that has given me an avocation to carry on to share with the world and to educate and to honor my husband and my family. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. So, Sydney, I would love to answer some questions.
Yes, and Randy, I want to thank you so much for that really wonderful presentation and for persevering through technical difficulties. We really appreciate it.
Okay.
We have a lot of questions coming in, but in the audience, please do continue to share questions. So one question that we've gotten a couple of times is how did the owners of the yard agree to the dig?
This was an interesting story because, in fact, the house and the property during the Soviet days had been nationalized. So this was considered to be like public housing.
Mhm.
So it was owned by the municipality of Lodz, and Yaron and Pierre got permission from the mayor and the city council to do the dig. And
Mhm.
you're going to say, why were they there? They presumably claimed to be there just for the commemoration of the liberation of the Lodz ghetto. So they met with all the city officials, and they just happened as an aside to say, hey, we got this guy back in the States that says his family has coins in his backyard, and would you give us permission to dig? And incredibly, they said, oh, yeah, dig to your heart's content. And how coincidental that Yaron and Pierre just happen to have a ground penetrating radar in their suitcase.
Yeah.
So yeah. So yeah. So they obviously were planning this one, but I feel it was unfortunate that they didn't share it with Mark.
Yeah,
It would have been nice had he been there when they dug up.
100%. But
Yeah.
yeah. So another question that has come in is, did you ever figure out why your father-in-law said he was from a different town than Lutch?
Yeah. Well, not 100% because obviously he wasn't around to ask this, but what had happened, the family was in Lodz. When the Nazis moved in September of 1939, they're looking around Lodz and it had a huge Jewish population. And they're trying to figure out, what do we want to do with all these Jews? And you know that they they didn't have anybody's best interest at heart. They were just trying to move everybody out. And their first thought was, okay, why don't we deport them? So Mark's family ended up being deported from Lodz to Krosno. So they ended up in Krosno. So the last place that the family actually lived in was in Krosno, although, they had no roots there. They didn't own a home there. They were in a Krosno ghetto. But for some reason, that's what he said. And actually, there were very few Lodz Jews who were deported, as we found out. Most of them ended up just getting walled into the Lodz ghetto. And in fact, that's where the Olivecs were, that were the next door neighbors. So it's not like it's not like the Nazis went around and picked geographic locations in Lodz and deported people. It almost seems maybe they went alphabetic because the Biedermans were B's, the Olivecs were O's. So the Biedermans got deported to Krosno. The Olivecs ended up in the Lodz ghetto.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay.
So we also are getting a few other questions about where the coins are now, and how your family felt about them staying in Poland.
They are currently in Lodz in a museum called the Museum of Archaeology and Ethnography.
Mhm.
How does my family feel about it? Terrible. Awful. They shouldn't be there, okay? They should not. Um, I had never felt, and I don't think anybody else in the families felt like, well, we need to personally possess them. We don't. I want them somewhere where they can be a legacy to the Holocaust. And I actually have family in Israel, one of whom's a retired. He used to be in the early days of his career. He was the assistant deputy minister of tourism, and so he knows a lot of people in the government. He's retired now. He's got a lot of time, and he was trying to nudge people to kind of shame or force the Polish government into turning the coins over to Yad Vashem, which I think is perfect. That's where they should be. He was having a modicum of success, getting some interest and enthusiasm in this. And then unfortunately, what happened was October 7th hit. And that kind of refocused everybody. So, and I mean, understandably, you got a war going on. You're not going to worry about some Holocaust survivor families' coins. But for me personally, I am probably not going to rest until those coins are out of Poland and somewhere appropriate where they could be on display with the family's story. Because where they are now in Poland, the family's story is not displayed. There's just a notation. The coins were actually found in a white ceramic teapot. 63 gold and silver coins were found in a white ceramic teapot, and the teapot is sitting there with the coins around it in this display saying these coins were found in the backyard with information from a former resident in the US. Nothing about the family, the Holocaust. I think it would be important to show how they lived and then what happened to them. So, yeah, I think for me, it's my personal quest. They should be out of there and somewhere where they can have a legacy for my family.
Thank you. So we're also getting a lot of questions about what happened to the three sisters, if you have any further information about them that you can share.
I have all the, and it's all in the book too. You got to read the
Yes,
book,
so
folks.
everybody should read the book, but
Yeah,
if you
it's
want
in
to
the
give us
book.
a short summary.
Yeah, but let me give you the quick overview. Okay, they were in Krosno. They were deported to Krosno. The whole family was still together. Hersh at that time was in a work camp at the Krosno airport, so he was not in the ghetto. Um, Mark's grandparents and the three girls were living in the ghetto. They were split up when the ghetto was liquidated, which kind of happened as the war was starting to go bad. They started liquidating ghettos. Um, the mom and the two eldest sisters were shot and buried in a mass grave in Krosno. Grandfather and the youngest sister were transported and they were gassed. So yeah. So it's not a happy ending. The only one who survived out of the immediate family was just Hirsch.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
really painful for
very
sure.
painful history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm going to combine a couple of questions just because we're a little short on time, but I do want to, and a lot of us want to know, like, uh, what was the process like of writing the book? And were you able to do any research sort of pre-internet? And if so, what resources did you use?
Actually, the only real major success that we had pre-internet was when we went to the Wannsee House in Berlin. They had a
Mm-hmm.
lot of archives, but like I said, they had nothing on Mark's dad's family. It was just the mom's family. So,
And can you tell us more just like about the process of writing the book as well and how that kind of
oh,
felt to your
well,
husband?
here's the thing. You might think, did we always think we were going to write a book? Absolutely not. But, I was teaching school at the time. And, whenever we had time, money, we'd go and do a little bit of research, go here, to go there. And I'd be bringing all my stuff in and say, hey, look, everybody, this is what I did this summer.
Yeah.
And finally, they said, one of my colleagues said, I want to read the book when you write it. I'm like, book? Who would want to read this? It's just my family.
Mhm.
And by the time that we had the Schindler's List connection, the coin story, the coin finding story, I mean, there were so many amazing events that happened that we thought, gee, maybe we should put it in a book. And part of the book process, first off, we didn't have any time when we were still working. When we finally retired, we moved to California. We're enjoying the sun and, sun and the surf. And we live very near Chapman University, which has a Holocaust Center. We used to go to, hear some of the speeches there. And one of the people who was a professor emeritus there, I believe, David Crow, um, Mark ran into him one day and said, hey, let me tell you my story. And he told him the story and he looked at him and he says, wow. He says, you have probably the most fascinating Holocaust story I've ever heard, and I've heard them all.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
says, you guys should write this. And
Mhm.
I'd been wanting to write it for a while. And it took David Crow to say to Mark, write it, to get him to write it. And because I wanted to write it, but Mark kept saying, "Oh, no, 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 let's, get somebody." And he asked David Crow if he'd write it, and David said, "No, no, no, you know, I write like a historian. It's going to be, factual and dry." He said, "You guys have the enthusiasm. Write it like it's your family."
Yeah.
So I sat down. After David said that, I sat down in front of the computer. I said, "Okay, Mark, this is it. We're going to do this." And that was what did it. David kind of just gave us that impetus to say, A, it should be written down because it's good. And B, you should do it yourselves.
Yeah.
So guess
Sometimes you
what?
just need a little push and you're
Yeah,
on your.
that's all we needed. Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. So we
And
are, oh,
we are
sorry,
at
go
the
ahead.
end of our time.
Yes, but I always like to end our Story Survive programs by asking just one final question. And I know it's a bit of a hard one, but if there is sort of one thing that you hope people take from this story, or maybe the one thing you can think of right now, what would you hope that people take from it?
Oh God, I'm gonna start crying now.
I know it's a
Just,
tough one.
just, it's a very emotional thing for me. I guess just the reality that life is hard. I don't think we were put on this earth to hurt each other. I think that if you have any opportunity to help each other, help each other. You know,
Yeah.
that's what we should do. We shouldn't hurt, we should help. We're here to take care of each other and help. So, on that happy note,
Well, I think that's a really good note to end on. And Randy, I really want to thank you again for such an amazing presentation and for sharing the book with us and for being with us today. So we really appreciate it. And I really want to highly encourage everyone to buy Schindler's Listed, which you can do so at the link in the chat. So please do check it out. I really encourage you to do so. We also hope that if you enjoyed today's program, that you will consider making a donation to support the museum at mjhnyc.org/support, and also joining us for our upcoming programs, which you can find at mjhnyc.org/current events.